Coming up next on this episode of the Unlock You podcast.
A confession to betrayal from an affair and an addiction to pornography. And of course, I'll let James talk more about that. From my perspective, it felt as if my life was over.
Yeah.
3 younger girls and a very large, influential ministry that we were a part of. And it felt as if my life was over.
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. This is Unlock You with Dr. Shannan Crawford. I'm a clinical psychologist, leadership consultant, and a really big fan of you getting to fulfill your life purpose. I want you to get unstuck and unlock your potential relationally, emotionally, spiritually, and vocationally. Thanks for joining us, and let's get started. Hey everybody, I am over the moon excited. I had the opportunity to go with Life Unplugged for a beachside resort opportunity of a lifetime with Teri and Debbie and a whole crew of women. And we just did no makeup and in jammies and divulged our guts and cried, and it was wonderful and rebuilt so much better after it. So I said, hey Teri, you and your amazing husband, James, have to be my guest, and I have to hear more about livelifeunplugged.org. So I'm going to just give a quick synopsis and then let them jump in and share more of their story and how they got to where they are today. So James, an ordained pastor, holds a master's in executive leadership with an emphasis in conflict resolution and team building. James is a certified executive marriage and recovery coach, mentoring leaders in ministry, leadership, business, and recovery around the globe, which I understand recovery is one of his strengths. Teri is an ordained pastor. Hey, girl, a certified marriage and recovery coach. She holds a degree in education, a master's in professional counseling. Yep. And works in a private practice as an APCC. She's been trained in pastoral marriage and family counseling and leads women's groups for personal growth, as well as for those who have experienced betrayal and personal loss, which she will share today. James and Teri have dedicated their life to speaking, coaching, and leading others regarding relational, behavioral, and organizational health. They are the co-founders of livelifeunplugged.org, which offers transformational opportunities for individuals and couples interested in a journey of recovery and enrichment. And as many of us know, we can go to the big conference and we can get the software updates, which is great at that mental level, get the techniques and the homework. But I really appreciate the deep dive and more of the psychological understanding of family dynamics and addiction and root issues. So thank you so much, James and Teri, for being our guests today.
It is so good to be here.
Yes, we are.
Love it.
Super excited. And we are both 7s on the Enneagram. So
Yeah,
we'll
we are.
be bopping around.
Yes. Okay. So share your story. How did you become this couple that now has just so authentically laid down any pretense and really just rallies around other couples and builds them up and individuals as well?
Well, you know what? I really want to start by just prefacing that, the authenticity and vulnerability that we walk with today was developed. It wasn't something we just had. We were in ministry for many years, and we held positions both in local ministry, pastors of a local church, lead pastors, as well as in our denomination as national leaders. James held a couple of different positions with our denomination. And we found ourselves on a road that included a massive just hiccup.
Crash.
Yeah, crash. It was a crash.
Crash.
Yeah,
A crash. Yeah, and that was actually putting it lightly.
Devastating.
Yes. And, I think it's a really good place to start at what we kind of call the beginning of the end, which is the beginning of the new beginning. In that we had walked for so long with both of our issues that we had, when the kindness of the Lord sort of brought us to a point where it was like exposure. Now I found myself on the end of a confession to betrayal from an affair and an addiction to pornography. And of course, I'll let James talk more about that. From my perspective, it felt as if my life was over.
Yeah.
3 younger girls and a very large, influential ministry that we were a part of. And it felt as if my life was over. But what happened was we just had some really good people around us who basically looked us in the eye and said, if you want to walk this out, and Teri, you have a choice. Because if there is any kind of abusive structure or something that you feel would be really detrimental, then of course we give you, that grace. But if you want to walk it out, we'll walk with you. There was a few people who did that. And I really prayed and heard the Lord. And I felt him say that he would restore. Now I wanted it to restore. I wanted it to look like something different at the time, right? We have our list that the Lord needs to restore. But what he showed me as I journeyed, and I can speak to that, James can speak to his perspective, is that I found myself first. That part of me that had been shoved down for so many years as part of someone else's addictive cycle, that codependent cycle that I was in, the stuff that had been stuffed down even from my childhood, that I thought I was being a really strong pastor and keeping the lid on. But what he helped me find was authenticity and vulnerability and honesty. It was amazing and excruciating at the same time. But that unfolded for me a journey of, hey, we could go back into ministry, and we went through a very extensive restoration process within our denomination. And we're asked to pastor again in the local church, but the Lord really assured us
to do that.
You're doing the right thing by using your story, getting the credentials to really kind of walk alongside others to do the same. Like there's hope. If you want to hang on to a specific, part of that pathway, whatever it might look like, there's hope. So,
it's the journey that we went on. You didn't see it coming, the crash. Well, we talk about the crash, but if you go back, and I say, I'm going to bring some understanding of the before, because I think there's a lot of people who might be listening thinking, well, how did you get there? We were pastoring a church of 10,000 people. We were the lead pastors in Hawaii, in paradise. And it was beautiful. It was like, how could you do something so people would say stupid, and I'm like, well, there was a journey that got me there that led to that place of crash. But then the journey afterwards was with the restorative work that Teri started talking about. But growing up, I grew up in a Christian home. And in this Christian home, we were in the church very well respected, loved, and we were leaders, and my mom and dad and elders and this and that. But inside the home, it was just chaos, to just multiple facets, from just the relational to even addictions and things that I saw and I observed. And I never saw, I always saw ruptures, but I never saw repair work.
That's a good point.
So I kept on living in this rupture world where it was rupture, but never rupture, repair. So my life was heightened at all times, as a young boy. Now, someone might say, well, you're blaming. No, I'm not blaming anybody. It's just my reality. It was what I lived in, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I kept on living in this. Well, eventually you get that rupture going so much, you figure out a way to medicate it. And so at a young age, I was exposed to pornography, and I used it as a drug, because being in a Christian home, drugs, people would see it, alcohol, people would see it. And my life consisted of athletics, family, and church. That's what it was. And I thought all that stuff will ruin all that. But if I do this secret thing over here, no one will know. And you still get dopamine response. You get a relief of what you're feeling. And that's what I was like, I can't handle the stress. I can't handle the pain. I lived my whole life that way in secrecy, because I thought if people knew what I did, there would be a great deal of shame, and then there would be a great deal of rejection. And I did not want rejection in my life.
Right.
I feared it. I feared that, just like I feared failure and rejection. It just drove me to say, I will do whatever it takes to self-preserve and make sure I'm okay. Well, then Teri and I started dating. We met each other in high school. Well, actually, we dated way back. If you go way back and do the research, I think we were at story time together when we were like 4 years old. So at the local library.
It out. We're like, hey, were you there during
I was the kid that they were kicking out all the time. She was a little girl up front listening all the time. And so, but we started dating in high school. We were senior sweethearts. We got voted that, and senior prom court and all that stuff. But at that time, I was struggling, not at the depth. It just got worse as the stress started to continue to increase. So more demands and more expectations. And athletics took me to a Division I college to compete. And I went and I did my best, but I did it. So I did the approval of others as well. And I always lived for that approval, the affirmation, that thing that I long for to say, you're good and you're okay. And I didn't know how to self-soothe myself. I didn't know how to take care and really care for myself. So then we got married, but that was just in there the whole time. So we went into ministry. Well, I took that competitive and that strive to be the best. And we took it into ministry as well. Teri and I did, and had a youth group, and our youth group was 1,000 kids. And we just wanted to do things, but our heart was, let's do things for the kingdom of God. Let's win people to Jesus. Let's disciple them. And then when stress was still there, I was still, on the days I'd go away and I didn't know how to deal with it. I just didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
Nor did I know how to talk to anybody about it, by the way.
And I think it's good to interject here too, that for spouses who are listening and, maybe have gone through something like this, or, someone who has, I didn't know what was going on. All I knew was sort of the cycles of
anger and
isolation, like things would be really good, but then all of a sudden it would be, kind of that addictive cycle. But when you don't really have words for it, you just kind of, what's going on? In my own coping, it was like, well, let's just make it all okay. Let's just make everybody happy. It's just keep things going. I didn't know about those things. And, I look back and I go, why wouldn't I just have asked?
But the abuse, it was an abusive cycle though, because I drug her and my girls through those cycles every single time. So talk about trauma.
Can you unpack that for us? Because I think a lot of people do that, but then maybe they don't realize there's that cycle, even to things that are not just drugs and alcohol. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was thinking about that. I had to explain that, because it might not be drugs or sex or alcohol, but it could be work. It could be hobbies. It could be things that you obsessively focus on to get something out of it that it's not supposed to provide for you. And you never take care of yourself or learn how to self-soothe or self-regulate and so on and so forth. And so I didn't know I was doing this. And so I would go on this great high. James would be doing great, happy, and everybody loves James. But then I would come into this place, I'd be faced with kind of a criticism or a potential failure. And I would start to cycle out, and I'm thinking, oh no. And that's when I started to self-preserve. It's like, oh, how do I protect myself? Because I don't want to face this. So I'd come into this. Then I would eventually get into my behavior, my addictive behavior. And this is not just for what I dealt with. People do this all the time. This is when they get really intense with work. And they just put in 60, 70 hours a week, and it's that they disregard their families, or they make excuses, or or even their hobbies, or obsessive TV, or obsessive where they focus so they don't have to feel.
Yes.
I was afraid of feeling. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to feel pain, and why would I want to feel pain? So I'll just go numb myself. So I would get into my addictive process, and I would numb myself. Well, then my family felt, Dad, disconnect. They would see me pull away, and they would see me like, why is he so distant? And even to the point angry, and he gets kind of, I get edgy, and I'm like, oh, what's going on? And so I didn't know what to do and how to handle that, and even beyond it, I didn't talk to anybody about it. Because if I did, I would forfeit, quote, quote, my standing or what I was doing. So I feared that deeply. It doesn't give me excuse. It just was my reality in my own mind. And then I would come out of that and realize, I got to get out of this again. So Lord, please forgive me. And I would come to the Lord, and he would forgive me every time. But the problem was, he wasn't allowed to heal me, really. Because it says in James, it says, if you confess your sins before one another, that's where God heals you. But if you confess your sins before him, he forgives you. So I'm like, I forgot this healing aspect of God's, where I'm confessing to someone else and allowing someone else to be a part of that process. No one was a part of my process. And so I'm really white knuckling my way through this, trying to hold on, thinking I can do this, and God will forgive me, and God, please, sorry. And true repentance, because I'm like, I have true desire for repentance, because I didn't want to live there. I hated it. And I would get so angry with myself. Well, then they experienced that. When I started turning anger towards myself, they experienced it. But then I would come in, and then I felt that I was okay with God. God and I were feeling good. I felt good with God, and I felt God's love and acceptance. And I would be back in the good James. Everything's good, and everything's happy, and everybody experienced the influence of my joy and my personality. But then I would go back into another cycle again, and over and over and over again, my family experienced that. So talk about trauma. They didn't know who they were with, Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. They didn't understand how to operate. And so it was very confusing for them in that process.
Yeah. And so I think it was the Lord's kindness, right? I mean, eventually that led to his decline in terms of his own, and the shame that grew, led into this, this deprivation that eventually was an affair. And it was the Lord's kindness to bring us to a place of like, hey, enough. We were able to make a mid-course adjustment there. I think the one thing that we will say to people is, hey, we know that pain, and we also apologize for any leader, because there was people involved as well.
A lot of people.
And so we don't make light of the journey that we were on.
No.
But I do tell people, I look back on that season before our crash, and I wish I would have spent $1 million on counseling and therapy and whatever it was that we thought we need, but we thought we couldn't. We thought that it was somehow bad, like that somehow God would love us less.
Or people would.
Or people would, yes. I mean, there was just such a mindset, and whether that was something we made up or something that was communicated to us, regardless, we were responsible for carrying that. But when we did give our hearts over to a process, the Lord was so faithful and just stripped us both of the things that were the lies, the belief systems that were holding us there. And so we get it. We get it.
Yeah. And people who are listening today, there are so many people, statistically, we look at numbers and 70% of men are struggling with sexual addiction across our nation. 50% of pastors are. So when you look at those numbers, that's a reality check to see, oh, now that's just that capacity. What about alcohol, drugs, pain medication? How about workaholism? How about whatever it is, the coping mechanism? All of us have coping mechanisms. I love coping mechanisms when they're healthy and when they're done right. Tomorrow, Teri and I are going to go to the beach. We're going to go surfing and go to the beach. Let's go. We're going to get out and disconnect from our electronics and have a chance to go and have some time together. And that will refresh us and fill us up. Then we don't do it right. Then all of a sudden you go into this shame cycle, and all of a sudden you find yourself very alone, very alone. I would find myself when I would follow myself in sin, I would then go into this deep shame of what my sin was. And when I'm in that shame, I then go into secrecy. And as I live in secrecy, then I would go into separation from people and God. And so I would feel myself so alone. And then all of a sudden you feel despair and hopelessness just settle in. It's like, oh, this is the best you ever have. And that's not God's intention for us at all. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think so many people are resonating and probably either wanting to turn this off right now because it's like hitting those places inside. So I just honor those that are willing to listen and lean in to that healing. Because I agree, Teri, there's most of the time people come to therapy when it's like the wheels have already fallen off. We're already in the crash, the public humiliation, things have been uncovered. And it's like, man, if we could just create a culture of prevention, in every area of life, we have continuing education, we invest diligently, proactively. And yet for most of us, we wait until there's a major issue and we just hold on to that phone number that somebody's given us. And then we just wait. So I'm hoping that even if somebody's listening and you don't have a problem yet, or it's under control, how many times I've heard people be like, oh no, I've got this. Like, it's just this small little pet thing. I've got it. It's not out of control. It's just this, one drink a night. It's just one pain pill a night, just scrolling through some images. Not that big of a deal. What would you say to maybe those who are kind of still in that space of I'm in control?
I appreciate when people come to me with that statement, because they're willing to identify that it's just, they have control of it, but it's a minor thing, but it's a thing. It's something, and so I would ask that you would open your eyes to the reality of what you're facing. Everyone struggles in one way or another. We're flawed. We're fallen. We are sinful beings. So if we can live our lives in such a way with curiosity of what God's potential is for our lives, and curiosity of like, is there more for me? Or is this it? And I really believe every person who's listening today, there is so much more that God has for you. See, our story, you might be listening today and thinking, oh, that stinks. That's a horrible story. But you didn't hear the redemptive part.
Right.
because we're living our best lives yet. I mean, but we had to, I had someone talk to me the other day. They said, we just want to get to the other side of this problem. And I paused, I sat there with him, and he's in a pretty tough situation right now. I said, can I just encourage you not to think about getting on the other side, and that we would sit together and walk through this situation together. If you don't walk through your challenge, your struggle, or your pain, you'll never experience truly who God really is, because that's where he promises, I will never leave you nor forsake you. In the shadows of the valley of death, that's when he doesn't leave us. He's not up the mountaintop waiting for us to get there. He holds our hand, he picks us up, he speaks promises to our ears and says, hey, I'm right here with you. You can do this. You're gonna have to trust me on this. And I'm gonna walk you through it. And I'm gonna bring people in your life that are gonna love you unconditionally, that are gonna come alongside you, link arms, and partner with you to the end, to the finish line. That's where success is.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also really good for us to take a moment, even though it's hard, and empathize with the impact of our choices on other people as well. Because I think sometimes, and we always tell people, any secret will find a way to have an impact, whether it is felt on the outside and in very clear, tangible ways, or it's like what we felt many years, kind of like there's this offness. Whether that's a word, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And you're like, gosh. But, our girls, they're all, one of them's married now. We have one in college and one in high school now. And it's been, years since we've walked through this. But they've all had to go on a journey of healing because the messages of that it was hard for them in their developing years. Like, what's going on? Like, it made them vigilant. It made them anxious, their attachment. So we have to also go, hey, is something I'm doing or is, even if it seems benign or like, hey, I got this, can I just take a pause and see how it's impacting other people? Because if it's hurting someone else, even if it's on a very minimal level and in my mind, it's still worth just sort of allowing it to get some exposure in a really healthy way. Just like, God, what can I do? Grab somebody, get some help, get some support, because that changes family systems.
That's right.
And that's what we're after nowadays. It's like every single person we work with or every couple, it's literally a legacy, because then you see how that goes into generations. I loved how you prayed for us when we started, Shannan. It was so beautiful. But she said, that you were just asking the Lord to bless our family and our children to the generations and the thousands of generations. That's what we're after when we're looking at both our spiritual, but also our emotional health.
That's right.
And those connect.
That's right.
And I think it's worth pointing out that all of us, wherever we're self-medicating, it's a younger part of me. It's more of an unconscious part of the soul regress. And so that part of me is egocentric by nature, right? Doesn't mean I'm all narcissistic, I'm a selfish, bad person. It just means that part of me that needs a lifeline, that feels like I'm treading water and I don't know how to keep my footing. That part of me will naturally want to hold on to that coping mechanism, like an idol, like a life preserver.
Totally.
And so in that space, we want you to know you're not bad. And I know it can be really scary to bring it in the light because it feels like now I'm going to drown, I'm going to flood in all this shame and imposter syndrome, and people are going to see right through me. And so there is a middle space. It doesn't have to stay hidden and shameful. It also doesn't have to come out in a very traumatic, terrible way. You can choose safe people to talk to and start processing.
Many people have asked us, how did you get to that place? And we tell people we had talked and told our story with those who earn the right to hear our story. And not everybody's earned the right to hear our story, because when someone's unhealthy and you give that information to them, they're going to do unhealthy things with it.
Sure.
So you really have to have the right people around you. And we did. We had the right people around us, healthy people that would surround us, even how messy or whatever it was, they were able to meet us in that place.
It's funny because when we talk about restoring, it's like we always say, we never thought we would be doing this. You always have this picture in your mind. Get into really the gutter with people. It's so beautiful and fulfilling though, because you get to see a life reborn in a resurrection way, in so many of these things. So, but it was neat too, because I think our story, and I know what we talked about our little previous talk, was the deprivation, the excruciating part of the crash scene. But what we found was this beautiful lifelong commitment to being okay with not being okay when we feel that way, to being honest and vulnerable, to living in reality. You know, there are still some things that we're human, right? So we still have to work through. It's like, it's okay to be there, you know, and to keep good people around us so that we can do that. And it's great because we basically were able to go like, hi, my name's Teri. And he was like, hi, my name's James. And we're like the 2.0 version of each other. And our kids were like, gosh, you guys are so much different. Our friends would say, you both are so much different, but yet you guys are, you know, the same people, but just your qualities are different. Yeah. We discovered that we both have very different personalities. Before it was like, you know, I just didn't understand it. So it was like, well, part of that just seems bad to me, or I couldn't handle it. And it would be like, oh, that part just is confusing to me. Whereas now we've dove into like the Enneagram, we've done the Berkman assessment, we've done pretty much every assessment possible. But what we've figured out is that there's unique qualities to each of us that we can be patient and curious about. That sometimes I can say, hey, that part feels like the way you're communicating to me feels a little too harsh or something, or hey, can you clarify that? Instead of me going, oh, that just feels traumatic, and I'm immediately in this really pushback state. And instead, I'm safe enough now. I can move forward and say, hey, I want to know more. Tell me more about why you would look at it that way, or you would find it that way. But we're in the Enneagram world. He's an 8, I'm a 7, so it makes our interactions super fun.
Yes, we always say this.
Sarcastic?
No. They would describe us as I am Rambo and she is Elf, the movie Elf. And that would be kind of the description of how. So when we operate together, man, we can go take the world. Oh,
we have so much fun. We're visionaries.
Gosh,
we're like,
but if we are struggling and we hit a wall and we are in our limbic brain, we can take out the world too. Yeah. That's just our reality. And that we know it, but we built tools around that so that we are able to navigate through those things. But we didn't know this before. We had to learn it. And it's not that we were hopeless, going through this process. We became hopeful because we're like, wait, there's more to this whole thing, and there's hope for us in the future. Yeah.
I love the way you guys team as a couple. So what would you say if somebody's listening, they're like, oh, that's really nice that you have this angelic little marriage now. What if somebody's in the middle of the throes of it and the person who has divulged the affair or the whatever the addiction situation, and the other person is really struggling and it's kind of getting toxic in their dynamic and they don't know how to navigate that? Because you had said we need to be sharing it with safe people, but when you're the recipient, it's real hard to be the therapist, safe person. So what does that look like when you're counseling couples?
Well, I think we always first assess, the level of stabilization, right? I mean, if something's got a toxicity to it, we have to create safe boundaries there. So sometimes if that's the case, then we recommend, doing a repair plan or a recovery plan, sometimes even a safety plan. If there are some situations, I had a safety plan with James at first, and it was obviously somebody was helping me do it, but it was more like, hey, I'm realizing, I'm finally understanding the impact now that everything's been exposed. And these are some things that I really want and need in order to repair and walk through this. But these are some things that can't happen anymore. And if they do, because you're human, and sometimes relapse does occur, I have to know, number one, what your plan is, and you have to be accountable to that. And so sometimes it would be, hey, if he was really amazingly strong through the process, and I
was all in. I knew this is my one chance to actually get free.
Yeah, but and some people are, and some people aren't. But he was within 90 days. He was really, walking in sobriety. But within that 90 days, it was like, hey, if there was a relapse and we understand that can happen, you need to be honest. You need to tell me. We need to be able to walk through that. And if you're not going to be honest and you're not going to tell me, then there are going to be some relational, somewhat consequences in the sense of like, I might need you to find maybe somewhere to stay for a while so I can repair, because that's not only scary and takes me back, but my body would experience trauma again. So we just need to make sure that we have some safety. there. So, so sometimes if there's a high level of toxicity, then of course we'll assess for, does there need to be some kind of groundwork there? We always recommend that couples are in individual journeys of recovery. So we tend to do and that's one of the reasons why people really love working with us, because we do work with couples together. So sometimes that feels safe for both parties.
And then we separate them. I'll work with the guy, Teri with the girl, and then we'll bring them together.
Yeah.
And it's important to create those environments for people.
Yeah.
For the ones, like in my role, that I was the one who committed the affair. Well, I knew that in that process, I had to surround myself someone who was stronger than me. I had to get somebody in my life that would, I'll just say it this way, call my BS out. Is that all right to say that here?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's something, that's a spiritual term right there.
Yeah.
But it's where they would look at, and I had Dr. Ted Roberts, he was an ex-Marine, he's a sex therapist, and he walked me through a process, but loved me deeply. He loved me deeply, where he says, James, I can call you out when I need to, but he always would put his arm around me and say, but let's do this together. And so all of a sudden I felt, okay, I know I can do this because I'm not going to be rejected and abandoned in this. That's what people fear the most, is the abandonment. When I come to that place, I'm alone. I'm going to be alone. But there has to be, because then all of a sudden, Teri then wasn't on the front lines of receiving all of the shrapnel that's flying all over the place.
Yes.
I also kind of work through that. And then he brought us together, and then we worked through it with the care of somebody. But you got to be strategic about it. It's not like we had a couple that went to a huge marriage conference one time, and there was like 7,000 people there, and he confessed everything right there, because they were kind of encouraged to kind of deal with some stuff. And he confessed, well, it was a dandy. I mean, it was bad, and they didn't know. It was she was just the recipient.
Vomited on me.
Yeah. Now what do I do? He felt better. He finally got it out. It's like, oh, I feel better now. I feel lighter. And she's devastated. And they just didn't know what to do. Well, then that's when we got him. But then we partner with them, and then I took him alone for a while and really help walk him through what recovery is, and stabilize him individually first before we even ever started working with them together. Because she needs to be able to look at him or me as this, to say, show me some consistency first. Then I can come to the table with you. Because what I saw is it's not consistent. I don't trust you. Well, trust has to be rebuilt to a place where some stabilization takes place. Then we can come into this place of feeling safe. Now we can work together on this. A lot of people say this, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it together. Well, that might not be the best decision. We need to get some stabilization first.
Absolutely. And I've seen that create space for a lot of like dominance, and depending on the couple and the language and mindsets they have. So like if they're in a religious, they could use religious language, like, you were supposed to forgive me, you're not forgiving. And so somehow forgiveness means lack of boundaries, and I'm a doormat, and I've just hyper spiritualized, and actually go into spiritual abuse, whether they realize it or not, because the person that feels exposed feels so much shame. They feel really out of control and scared and overwhelmed. So I need you to feel bad. I need you to stop talking, and I need you to be small, so I don't feel so exposed to the only one with a problem. So that blame shifting in a couple dynamic, it's really toxic. And other people use different language. It's just, we know religion can be an easy one that somebody can domineer another partner. And so if they're in the middle of it, in the throes of it, that shrapnel really can get thrown on each other with the shame and the blame shifting.
You bet.
Yes,
you
absolutely.
Bet.
And what's really helpful in those situations, and we spend quite a bit of time, as do, other, organizations like ourselves, but with a lot of psychoeducation in terms of like, this is what's happening to the brain, so I'll be working with the women or the partners who are dealing with the betrayal trauma. And it's like, okay, what is happening in someone's addictive cycles or, their repetitive behavior patterns? What is it that you feel like now that you have these sort of bags on you from, it's great that there's this confession, but, and what does it look like for you to feel what you're feeling and have space to do that and not be told? And that again, like you said, like sometimes when somebody's going through their own trauma or their own recovery, it's like, I don't want to feel your pain too. I can't handle it. So don't bring the pain in, but you have to have a space for that.
That's right.
I mean, you have to have a space to feel that pain. So that's why we always recommend, recovery group process, process groups scripts are so good.
Mhm.
And just starting to understand what is going on. You know, a lot of women, you know, you kind of give them the concept of what is gaslighting.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
they're like, oh, what I've been experiencing. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
not
not you, it's not
crazy.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, that was a technique that I think, you know, in an addictive cycle, you know, James would use, not because he was trying to necessarily hurt me, but it was trying to run away from his own pain.
To get
Right.
away.
But
Absolutely.
hey, it'd be good if you started to feel stupid or bad,
It's
Mhm.
often
because then I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, just addressing those, but safety is number one.
you bet.
You have to be safe in that. So sometimes that means that you have to put in some good and healthy boundaries
Yes.
while you're recovering. That is
Yeah.
the most important thing. And if you have children involved as well. So, you know, we really find that's kind of the first part.
Well, and two is in our world today, it's a male driven kind of focus.
Mhm.
And I'm going to say something here, and we don't need to spend a lot of time because it'd probably be a whole nother podcast. But in our world today is that, especially in the church a lot, is that there's pressure put on women.
Mhm.
If you would do X, Y, and Z,
Yep.
he would be doing better.
Right.
And if you would provide for him sexually or emotionally, physically, then he would be doing better. And I want to advocate for women.
Thank you.
Because when I say this, my heart even breaks and I get emotional, because how many women live with this false responsibility to regulate their husband's, you know, own pain, and they live with this part of their lives. And can you imagine how many women are just struggling because they think I'm responsible for my husband's chaos, or
Mhm.
I'm responsible because our marriage is not doing well, and they just start to go crazy in their minds, you know, and then they never really discover their true self because they're just feeling this hopelessness in who they are. So I say that because I think it's an open door for deeper conversations. But bottom line is that we have to take a step back and say, wait a second, we have to look at what healthy relationships, the way God designed them to be.
Yes.
It's not just, women weren't created for the man to be okay. No, no, we're equal partners here. You know, and we have to look at what healthy marriage really is and how it is to be lived out. And so I say that because sometimes people think, well, if this would take place, I would be, no, that's an excuse.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of excuses in our world today. I want to look at the reality and Teri uses this word, and you do too. We just got to be curious. What does this look like?
And I appreciate you saying that as a man, because I think there's a lot of times that women hold that tension and it actually reinforces codependence because she is responsible for another person, which is biblically not true and not healthy. Right. And so what I've done a lot is helping the female learn that she's okay and strengthen her sense of self, that with or without him, not saying that we're just throwing our marriage away, but that internal, like, I have to have this in order to be okay. If somebody is listening to this and you just feel like I am literally not going to survive and take my next breath, I don't know how I'm going to function, then you know your spouse is an idol. They are special, they're important, you want to be in covenant with them, but they are not supposed to ever be your God. Even as a married couple, they are never supposed to be your source. So the more that we clear that out, and it helps you internally regulate and have those boundaries to be lovely. You don't have to throw the divorce word every time. You don't have to be so dramatic and angry and upset to try to bolster up your courage to have a boundary, because that then hits all the shame and the activating of abandonment and all that stuff. Rather, having appropriate boundaries with high warmth and high structure of saying, here's what we can do, here's what we cannot do. If you choose to continue to talk to me, no problem, I'll just leave. Or if you choose to talk to me in a different way and we change the dynamic, I'm happy to stay and continue to engage. But there's strength and loveliness when somebody is not codependent. And I think culturally, for lots of different people, the woman feels responsible to keep the family together and she's sinning and all this pressure that is so not accurate. Actually, having somebody have a firm boundary and a cost to their sin and their consequence usually grows people up quicker than us just kind of enabling and tolerating things.
I agree.
Absolutely.
100%.
And we found that in our process as well. I think it's, you know, when you learn something, it's different than just reading it.
Applying.
We were pastors. We would host all these great things coming, but when you really learn it and you experience it, you know, then you can sit with people differently in it.
And this is another thing we've always said too, is that for me, the pain on the outside of my life had to increase more than the pain on the inside for change to take place. So God uses sometimes the pain on the outside, tension in the marriage, tension in family, job, life
Mhm.
circumstances to catch your attention. He's not going to punish his children. I believe he disciplines his children.
Mhm.
And so there's a part where it's like there's some tension there on the outside, but what it does, it starts to increase more than the pain on the inside. It's like, oh, so when everything fell, I was caught, and then all of a sudden it exploded. Well, it's like, I have an opportunity to change because I can't keep managing the internal pain.
Yeah.
Well, if you do, there's great hope, and it might not be catastrophic like our story was, but I'll tell you, it could be minor. It could be some things that just some, habits and things that you need to work on and start to identify, but it's better to start working on them now before they become catastrophic later. There's a lot less cost to it, but there's always a cost. And so start working on those things, specifically in your marriage. The two of us, when we work through challenges together, oh, it's so fulfilling because it might be my challenge, but then she gets to celebrate together with me as we get to the finish line of that challenge. Or if it's our challenge, we do it together and there's a unity, there's like a bond. I love it in Ecclesiastes 4:12, it says a strand of three is not quickly broken. That strand is really Teri and I and the Holy Spirit binding us together. But that binding process really is through a challenge and things that the Lord really works through. It's really a wonderful process, and it's not something to be afraid of. It's part of the process of life, but our world has created this uncertainty of it. And I'll be honest, the church a lot of times has created uncertainty because there's a lot of shame wrapped around any kind of sin. We got to then unwrap it and unfold it and say, then what does this really look like? And can we just navigate this? And can we work through this? Because God's promises are true. He's not going to just change his mind tomorrow, but we need to work through this, and I think it's as important for us to remember those things. So
it's so good. And I love the story of hope, that there is a story after. So I think we've hit on a couple points that we want to be proactive. There is a cost. So whether you spend the money ahead of time preventing, or you live the cost, and then you really have to put the brakes on your entire life because it's come crashing down. And also that there's hope and there's a 2.0 that many times I think we stay hidden in darkness because one, we don't want to let go of those false comforters, those idols that we've always relied on. But when we release that, our mood becomes more stable. We become more emotionally available. We're able to enjoy and savor moments more rather than that kind of irritability of I need to go alone, I need to go drink, or I need to go look at porn, or I need to go do something by myself, like have my little hidden life. I think the more that we bring things conscious and all of me is able to enjoy the blessings in my life, then I stay emotionally satisfied. We're able to enjoy the good in our life versus always feeling kind of torn. And then when people say nice things to you, there's this mask in the inside going, but if you knew everything, you wouldn't say that, right? And that imposter syndrome actually steals the good, the benefit, the love, the joy, the good people that are trying to invest in you. So I think if you can get plugged in with somebody like Teri and James or any of the other amazing organizations, groups, therapists, counselors, pastoral counseling, whatever you want to do in your situation, please be proactive. Your marriage is so worth it. Quality of life. And then the macro, the ripple effect of all the people that are influenced by your life being healthy and whole or crashing and people being disillusioned and fragmented as a result of your choices. So I just want to honor you guys. Thank you so much for your bravery and just sharing candidly. There's so much more to your story, but it's just so healthy and refreshing. And we're definitely going to have you back. And I would love to even talk about that pastoral failure and how people are kind of deconstructing the church and seeing hypocrisy. So maybe we can schedule that for a future one. But we love you guys. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you for the next episode. Bye, guys.
Bye.